The silence of the galaxy. The stars were many, but none answered. Across the black sea of the galaxy, messages of fear and desperation moved from one relay station to the next. They carried the voices of a small race known as the Kethar. Their worlds burned, their cities fell, and still they called for help. The Kethar believed that someone would come. The Great Council of Worlds had promised peace, had promised unity, had promised that no race would ever stand alone. But promises were smoke in the wind. The first message was calm. It described fleets of unknown enemies entering Kethar space. It asked for aid, for a council observer, for anything that could stop the advance. Days passed. No reply came. Then the second message went out, sharper, broken by static, filled with the sound of weapons in the distance. It begged for reinforcements. Still, the galaxy was silent. When the third message spread, the voice of the Kethar envoy trembled. She spoke of cities crushed under fire, of children running through burning streets, of colonies cut off one by one. She asked, "Are we not part of the council? Do our lives weigh so little?" But her question vanished into the void. In the halls of the Great Council, where 1,000 voices once debated the law of stars, the name of the Kethar was not even spoken. Delegates avoided it. Their own borders mattered more. Their own fears pressed heavier. To speak of the Kethar was to invite responsibility, and responsibility meant risk. So they chose silence. Silence was safer. Back on the Kethar homeworld, hope began to break. Families hid underground, listening to the thunder above as enemy ships rained fire on their world. The council had abandoned them. Their supposed allies had turned away. In the dark tunnels, children whispered to their parents, "Why will no one come? Are we forgotten?" Parents had no answer. Only silence filled their throats. Among the soldiers who still fought, despair grew heavier than their weapons. They had trained for defense, not for endless retreat. Every day more comrades fell, more cities collapsed. Messages kept going out, coded in every channel, on every frequency, but each signal returned with nothing. Not a single world lifted a voice to say, "We are with you." The enemy knew this. Their commanders broadcast their own words across occupied skies. "The galaxy has abandoned you. No one will stand at your side. Lay down your arms and accept your end." Some Kethar wanted to believe this was a lie, but silence from the stars gave truth to enemy words. In the ruins of one shattered city, the envoy who had sent the first call for help sat alone. Her eyes stared at the night sky, searching for any flicker of hope. She had given her people promises, told them that the council would not forget them. Now she could not speak those words again. To speak them would be to lie. She covered her face with her hands, feeling the weight of every scream, every life lost under her failed hope. The silence was louder than any weapon. It crushed hearts before bodies. It tore belief before armies. For the Kethar, the galaxy had ended not with fire, but with abandonment. And then, one night, a faint pulse cut through the static, a signal weaker than the rest, almost ignored. It was different, strange, carrying a code not used by the council, not used by the great powers of the galaxy. The Kethar engineers almost dismissed it, thinking it noise. But the pulse repeated, steady and sharp. They strengthened the signal and listened. A voice spoke. It was not smooth like the voices of the council. It was harder, rougher, carrying an edge like stone. The language was translated with effort, but the meaning was clear. "We have heard your call. You are not alone." The engineers froze. They replayed it again. The same words, not from the council, not from their neighbors, but from a distant world many thought irrelevant. A world whispered about as dangerous, untamed, strange. The voice carried one name that cut through despair like fire through dark. Earth. No one in the Kethar tunnels knew what this truly meant. Humanity was not counted as a great power. They were not seen as saviors. Yet in the moment of silence, when the galaxy had turned away, it was their voice that reached through. A single promise spoken with strength. "You are not alone." The envoy lifted her head. For the first time in many weeks, her heart felt a spark. It was not safety, not victory, but it was hope. And in a galaxy that had given them only silence, hope was a weapon more powerful than any fleet. The message spread through the broken cities, through the soldiers on the ground, through the families hiding in tunnels. Humanity had spoken. Humanity had heard them. And in that promise, the Kethar found reason to keep breathing, reason to keep standing. The enemy still advanced. Their fleets still rained fire. But now whispers moved in secret places. Earth is coming. Humanity is coming. No one knew what humans could truly do. No one believed they could defeat empires. But one truth was clear. Humanity had chosen to stand where no one else would. And for the Cathar, abandoned by the galaxy, that choice was everything. The arrival of the unexpected. The first human ship that appeared in Cathar skies was not grand or elegant like the fleets of the Council. It was heavy, gray, with scars of battles written across its hull. It looked like a weapon more than a vessel, built with straight lines and sharp edges. To the Cathar, who had only seen smooth and polished ships of the greater powers, this design seemed strange, almost brutal. But when its shadow crossed their ruined world, they felt something they had not felt in weeks. Protection. The signal from the human vessel was short. It did not offer promises of peace or treaties of support. It said only one thing: "We stand with you." The words were translated into the Cathar language with rough edges, but their meaning struck like thunder. Families in the tunnels wept when they heard it. Soldiers on broken front lines gripped their weapons tighter. Even the envoy who had given up hope stood taller. Someone had come. Someone had chosen them. The enemy laughed at the sight. Their commanders watched through distant screens and called the humans reckless. One world cannot change fate, they declared. They ordered their fleets to crush the new arrivals as easily as they had crushed the Cathar. But they did not know the nature of humans. When the first wave of enemy ships descended, the human vessel did not retreat. It turned its weapons outward and fired with a fury that shook the skies. Cathar eyes widened as explosions lit the heavens, enemy ships breaking apart one by one. The humans fought like predators, not defenders. Every move was fast, brutal, efficient. They did not fight to delay the enemy. They fought to destroy. Soon more human ships arrived. They were different in size and shape, some built for battle, others carrying supplies. From them came landing craft that fell through the burning skies, delivering soldiers to the ground. The Cathar watched in awe as these strange figures stepped from their craft. They were taller, heavier, armored in black and steel. Their faces were hidden by helmets, but their voices were clear. "Stand with us. We will not leave you." Human Marines moved through shattered streets carrying food and medicine, helping the wounded, repairing what could still stand. They were not gentle. Their hands were rough, their voices sharp, but every action showed purpose. A soldier lifted rubble with bare strength to free a trapped child. Another stood guard over a Cathar family, refusing to sleep until danger passed. The Cathar could not understand why these humans cared. They were not allies, not bound by treaties. Yet here they stood, bleeding and fighting for strangers. In every act there was a message. Humanity did not need permission to do what was right. The enemy soon realized these humans were not like the Council races. They did not retreat when outnumbered. They did not beg for ceasefires. Instead, they turned ruined cities into fortresses. They filled broken streets with traps. They used fire, smoke, and shadows to confuse and kill. To fight humanity was not like fighting the Council. It was like fighting the very world that had shaped them, a world of storms, beasts, and endless struggle. As days passed, the Cathar began to fight beside them. Inspired by the human resolve, they rose from despair. Farmers carried rifles. Children carried water to the lines. Old engineers built weapons from scrap. The humans taught them not only to fight, but to believe again. The envoy watched this change with wide eyes. She had thought her people broken forever. Now she saw courage rising in faces that had been pale with fear. It was the humans who had lit this fire. They had done it not with words, but with action. The enemy's commanders grew angry. Their fleets were large, their weapons strong. Yet this alliance of desperate Cathar and fierce humans would not fall. Losses mounted. Pride turned to rage. They swore that soon they would crush the humans, wipe them from the stars, and prove to the galaxy that no single world could stand against an empire. But humanity was not afraid. They knew they could die. They knew they were outnumbered. Still, they stood without hesitation. For them, the meaning was simple. Abandonment was cruelty. Silence was betrayal. If no one else would fight, then humanity would. The Cathar children began to whisper stories of their protectors. They called the humans warriors of stone, unbreakable, unyielding. In hidden tunnels, old songs changed, now carrying human names beside Cathar heroes. Even in despair, hope had grown strong again. One night, as fire painted the skies above the homeworld, the envoy walked to the command post of the humans. She entered and saw their leader, a man with gray hair and eyes like steel. He looked at maps filled with red marks of enemy fleets. She asked him, "Why do you stand with us? Why risk so much for people you do not know?" He answered simply without looking up, "Because no one deserves to die alone." Those words spread like flame. Soldiers repeated them. Families whispered them. They became the heartbeat of the defense. No one deserves to die alone. The enemy prepared a great assault, massing their forces for one strike to end the war. They thought humanity would fear, that the Cathar would break again. But when the first signals of the invasion reached the planet, human and Cathar soldiers stood together on the walls of ruined cities. They did not see defeat. They saw a chance to prove that courage was greater than silence, and for the first time in living memory, the Cathar believed they might survive. Not because of the Council, not because of treaties, but because humanity had chosen to fight by their side. Humanity's unbreakable resolve. The days of fear began to change into days of defiance. Where once the Cathar only hid and whispered, now they walked with their heads higher. It was not because their enemy had weakened. The enemy still burned cities and crushed defenses, but the presence of humanity had turned despair into strength. On ruined streets, human soldiers and Cathar survivors fought side by side. The humans brought with them not only weapons, but something the Cathar had not seen in weeks: a refusal to surrender. When human marines dug trenches, the Cathar joined them. When humans built barricades, Cathar families carried stones and steel to help. Together they created walls where none existed, shields where there had been only rubble. The bond between them grew not from politics or treaties, but from simple acts of courage. A human medic bent over a wounded Cathar child, using limited supplies to keep her alive. A Cathar farmer who had never fired a weapon before stood guard beside a human soldier through the cold night. The language between them was broken, filled with gestures and rough translation, but it was enough. It told the enemy, "We are not alone anymore." The enemy, furious at the resistance, sent larger forces. Warships filled the skies, their guns raining fire. Yet every assault met traps, counterstrikes, and an iron will that would not break. Humanity fought as if the planet was their own home. They turned every building into a fortress, every street into a battlefield. Their tactics were strange to the Cathar. Humans did not fight like other races of the Council. They were willing to lose ships if it meant breaking the enemy's line. They accepted pain, knowing that survival was not won by safety but by sacrifice. Their commanders demanded not comfort but results, and their soldiers gave everything without hesitation. One scene became a story whispered through the tunnels. An enemy strike had collapsed part of a city wall, leaving dozens of civilians trapped. Fire fell from the sky as enemy troops advanced. A human marine already wounded refused to retreat. He carried Cathar children on his back one after another until he could carry no more. His armor was burned, his voice broken, yet he did not stop until every child was safe. Only then did he fall. The Cathar remembered him not as a stranger, but as a protector who gave his life for those he did not even know. The envoy watched these moments and felt her heart change. She had once begged the galaxy for help, believing that power came from great councils and mighty fleets. Now she saw that true power lived in the hearts of those who refused to abandon others. Humanity had brought not only weapons, but dignity back to her people. The enemy commanders mocked the humans in their reports. "They are reckless," they said. "They bleed for strangers. They will soon collapse under their own weakness." But as weeks passed, the truth became harder to ignore. The humans did not collapse. The more they were pushed, the more fiercely they fought. Their deaths became symbols. Their struggles became fire for others. The Cathar, who had once waited for rescue, now began to fight with their own hands. Inspired by humanity, they refused to remain victims. Across the galaxy, silent observers watched. Other worlds saw reports of the battles, saw how humans stood against impossible odds. Some felt shame, some felt fear, but none could deny the truth. Humanity had done what the Council would not. They had chosen to stand for those abandoned. On the battlefield, the enemy prepared something greater. They gathered their largest fleet, determined to wipe both Cathar and humans from the stars. Their commanders swore that this final strike would break the spirit of resistance once and for all. In the human command post, maps glowed with enemy movements. The gray-haired commander studied them with calm eyes. Around him, Cathar officers stood shoulder to shoulder with human strategists. They knew the numbers. They knew the enemy outmatched them in ships, in weapons, in experience. But no one spoke of surrender. The commander's voice was steady. They think we will break because of fear. But fear is not stronger than resolve. We hold the line. No matter the cost. Those words spread like fire again. Soldiers repeated them. Families whispered them in tunnels. Even children carried the echo, no matter the cost. As the enemy fleet began to gather above the world, Cathar survivors stood ready beside human soldiers. Their weapons were few, their strength limited, but their hearts were no longer broken. Humanity had given them more than protection. Humanity had given them the will to fight, and so the world waited. Skies burned red with the glow of enemy engines. The ground shook as weapons charged. Yet in the shadows of ruined cities, two races stood together. One small and nearly destroyed, the other fierce and underestimated. The enemy believed they were about to crush weakness. Instead, they were about to face the unbreakable resolve of humanity. The war that should not have been won, the night before the assault, silence fell across the broken world. Soldiers, both human and Cathar, rested in ruined halls and shattered streets, waiting for the storm that would come with the dawn. Fires burned in metal drums, casting long shadows across weary faces. Some prayed, some sharpened weapons, some simply sat, staring at the stars that had once betrayed them. Above those stars, the enemy fleet gathered, vast and endless, like a wall of death waiting to fall. Human commanders studied maps lit with faint blue light. They knew the odds. The enemy fleet outnumbered them 5-1. Their ships were larger, stronger, built to crush resistance in a single strike. But humans did not plan to fight the enemy's war. They would fight their own. The plan was not elegant. It was desperate. Asteroids drifting in orbit were turned into hidden mines. Old satellites were filled with explosives. Even broken Cathar ships were rebuilt into traps. Every street, every canyon, every stretch of sky became a weapon. Humanity had taught the Cathar a simple truth. Survival did not come from fairness, but from cunning. When dawn came, the enemy descended. The sky turned white with fire as their ships entered the atmosphere. Their voices thundered across the planet. This is the end. No one can save you now. But their words no longer carried power. The Cathar looked to their human allies and saw no fear, only steady resolve. The first wave fell upon the defenses. Enemy tanks rolled through burning streets. Enemy soldiers stormed the ruins. But every advance met fury. Walls exploded. Streets collapsed. Traps tore through armored lines. Human snipers struck from shadows. Cathar fighters, once farmers and workers, stood firm with weapons in trembling hands. Fear lived in their hearts, but they fought anyway. And beside them, humans moved like predators, fierce and relentless. Above, the skies became a sea of fire. Human warships, smaller but faster, darted between giants. They used broken satellites as shields, asteroids as hammers. Explosions shook the heavens as traps ignited, tearing holes in enemy lines. The enemy expected retreat. Instead, they found chaos, confusion, and a resistance that refused to die. In one battle high above, a single human frigate charged straight into a line of cruisers. Its captain knew there was no survival. He rammed his vessel into the enemy flagship, detonating its core. The explosion lit the night like a second sun. Enemy forces faltered, stunned by the madness and bravery of a people who would sacrifice everything. The name of that ship spread across the battlefield, spoken in whispers and in cries. They gave their lives so others might live. On the ground, the envoy of the Cathar fought beside human soldiers. She carried no weapon, only words, moving through shelters and broken streets, speaking courage to her people. When families wanted to hide, she told them to stand. When soldiers doubted, she pointed to the humans and said, "If they bleed for us, we will not fall for them." Her voice, carried by radio, became another weapon. The enemy pressed harder. Every time they were pushed back, they sent more. Entire districts collapsed under fire. Mountains split under bombardment. Yet still the defense held. It was not strength that held it, but will. Humanity had made the Cathar believe again, and belief was harder to kill than flesh. In the council chambers far across the stars, silent delegates watched the reports with uneasy eyes. They had left the Cathar to die, certain their fall was inevitable. Now they saw humans, one world, unimportant and ignored, facing an empire and refusing to bend. Shame spread through their halls, fear too. If humanity could do this for strangers, What would they do for themselves? The war dragged on into days that felt like years. The enemy should have crushed them in hours, yet every hour cost them ships, soldiers, pride. Humanity used fire, stone, steel, and cunning. The Cathar, once broken, fought with renewed spirit. Together they turned despair into a blade sharper than any weapon. Then the final assault came. The enemy gathered all that remained, a storm meant to break everything. The sky blackened with their ships. The ground shook with their guns. For a moment, even hope seemed fragile, but then the human commander's voice cut through every channel, carried to soldiers and civilians alike. They think we cannot win. They are right. But this is not about winning. This is about standing, and today, we will stand together. Those words reached every heart. Humans and Cathar alike shouted as one. They did not fight for victory. They fought for dignity. They fought because no one deserves to die forgotten. The battle began with fire and thunder. The enemy stormed every wall, broke every defense, poured into every street. Yet the defenders refused to fall. Side by side, human and Cathar stood, bleeding, burning, unbroken. By all reason, the war should not have been won. The enemy had numbers, power, history on their side. But against them stood something stronger. Resolve that would not bend, hearts that would not surrender. A bond born not of treaties but of sacrifice. As the enemy flagship descended to deliver the final strike, the humans prepared one last plan, one last sacrifice, and in that moment the fate of both races balanced on a blade of fire. A stand etched in stars, the last day began with fire. The enemy flagship, larger than mountains, descended through the atmosphere, its engines tearing the skies apart. Its weapons glowed, ready to erase what little remained of the defenders. The Cathar looked upward in terror. Even after weeks of courage, even after victories born of sacrifice, the sight of such power nearly broke them again. But then they saw the human fleet rising to meet it. Scarred ships, half-burned hulls, engines smoking from days of battle. They were not many, but they moved with purpose. Each ship had become more than steel. Each was a promise. Humanity had sworn they would not abandon their allies, and now they would keep that vow, even if it cost them everything. The commander of the humans stood on his bridge, his hands steady, his voice calm. Around him, officers waited for orders. He looked at the screen that showed the massive enemy flagship and spoke 4 words. This ends with us. The plan was simple, brutal, and certain to kill many. Human ships would draw the enemy into traps hidden in orbit, detonating mines and wreckage. Then the last of their fleet would strike at the flagship itself. Even if it meant sacrifice, there would be no retreat. There would be no second chance. This was the stand that would decide everything. The battle began with thunder. Human vessels darted through the void, drawing fire, weaving through wreckage. Explosions lit the blackness as asteroids shattered, releasing hidden charges that tore through enemy cruisers. For every human ship that fell, an enemy warship fell with it. The void became a graveyard of burning steel, drifting bodies and shattered dreams. On the ground, Cathar soldiers fought with equal fury. Streets that had been ruins for weeks now became rivers of fire and resistance. They fought not only for survival but for honor. They wanted the humans to see that their courage had not been wasted. They wanted to prove themselves worthy of the sacrifice given for them. One Cathar fighter, standing on the roof of a broken temple, raised his weapon to the sky and shouted for his people to hear. "We are not abandoned. We fight with humanity!" His voice carried through the channels, lifting spirits, fueling defiance. Across the world, Cathar repeated the cry. The words became their shield. Above, the flagship drew closer, its guns unleashing storms of destruction. Human ships broke apart under the fury. Yet even as they burned, they moved forward, refusing to retreat. One by one, they hurled themselves into impossible battles. A destroyer rammed an enemy cruiser. A carrier, its hull ripped open, detonated its engines to tear through a swarm of fighters. Every death was a message. Humanity would not bow. The envoy of the Cathar watched from the command post. Tears burned her eyes as she saw human vessels vanish in fire. She wanted to scream for them to stop, to save themselves, but she knew they would not. They had made their choice, and that choice had saved her people. She pressed her hand to her heart and whispered, "We will remember you, forever." At last, the human flagship, battered and burning, charged toward the enemy behemoth. Its engines roared, pushing it beyond safety. Inside, the commander stood tall. He gave his final order, for them, for all who were left alone. Make this count. The ship's core detonated as it struck the enemy vessel. The explosion ripped through the void brighter than any sunrise. The enemy flagship shuddered, cracked, and then split apart. Its wreckage burned as it fell into the planet's sky, a trail of fire seen by every eye below. The enemy fleet, shocked and broken, faltered. Their command was gone, their pride destroyed. They began to retreat, scattering into the stars. They had been defeated not by numbers, not by greater weapons, but by a will stronger than their own. Silence followed. For the first time in weeks, the guns grew quiet. Across the broken cities, survivors lifted their heads and stared at the sky still glowing with falling wreckage. They had lived. Against all reason, against all logic, they had lived. The Cathar wept openly. They embraced their children, their families, their soldiers. But when they spoke of victory, they did not speak of themselves alone. They spoke of humanity. They spoke of the people who had come when no one else would, who had fought and died for strangers. In the days that followed, stories spread. The Cathar sang of the human fleet, of marines who carried children through fire, of ships that turned themselves into weapons. Their names were etched into memory, spoken with reverence. Humanity had become not just an ally, but a legend. Far away in the council chambers, shame filled the air. Worlds that had chosen silence could no longer hide. They had watched, they had waited, and it was humanity who had acted. For the first time, whispers of Earth spread not as a footnote, but as a warning and a promise. This was a people who stood where others would not. This was a people who would fight for those abandoned. The envoy of the Cathar stood before her people and spoke words that would be carved into history. We were forsaken by the galaxy, but humanity chose us. They gave their blood for us. From this day forward, we will never forget. Humanity stood when no one else did. Humanity saved us. And so, in the silence of space where once despair had lived, a new truth burned bright. Humanity had shown that courage could change the fate of worlds. Their stand was written not in treaties or councils, but in fire, in sacrifice, in resolve unbroken. The galaxy had abandoned the Cathar. Humanity had fought by their side. And in that defiance, a story was etched forever in the stars.